What's up, Movement Masters? It's Sean Mishka, Movement Master, and OptimizeMovement.com, coming to you with another movement lesson. And today's topic is going to be one that we've discussed numerous times at varying lengths as well as different directions. You know, we've done it over the last number of months, but it's this huge can of worms that we can continually open and reopen because, in my opinion, it can really be one of the most important, if not the most important, of things that most movement specialists should learn to understand and learn to chase if we're ever going to design drills that are going to raise one's level of movement mastery. Okay? Most coaches out there kind of think that they have a good grasp of this, but yet when we start to look at their drills and we start to see the lack of understanding that they have in regards to some of these factors and ideas, we start to notice that they might be specializing areas of kinetics and kinematics, but then the athlete can't reproduce that when they actually get in the sport environment because they never fully address some of these aspects of the kinesiological pattern of the sport movement. So just to give you a few abbreviations here so you know and understand where we're going, the KP of Sport M is going to be the kinesiological pattern of the sporting movement. And of course, like you've seen me abbreviate in the past, the MM level is the movement mastery level. So today, with this type of lesson, I want to essentially offer you a little greater clarity regarding this topic as it's brought up to me over and over and over again by many of you out there with the question is, what is changing the movement mastery level and what are we trying to impact in the kinesiological pattern of the sport movement in order to increase that movement mastery level? Okay, let's remind ourselves as to what it is that kinesiological pattern of sport movement is. Essentially, in a nutshell, it's how evolved the biodynamic structure has become for the respective sport movement skills and those movement skills patterns within the context of the chaotic environment and distress of sport. But as you can see on the board behind me, it goes much, much deeper than that. Okay? And there's a lot of busyness going on up here, I understand that, but there's a lot to talk about and a lot to think about as we start to investigate the kinesiological pattern of sport in trying to ensure that we can evolve the biodynamic structure to match the movement patterns and skills. We're going to start there with that biodynamic structure evolution and try to think about what goes in to make that up, okay? Really, there's three main ideas here. The solidification of that biodynamic structure, the authenticity of that biodynamic structure, and then the kinetics and kinematics, in regards to how they evolve and how they reproduce themselves, again, within the context of the sport environment, okay? So kinetics and kinematics are going to be optimized depending on the task, of course. When we talk about the solidification, I'm essentially referring to here is how established that biodynamic structure has become for that sport movement, okay? How well is it laid down in place? The attractors versus the fluctuations, and what are we seeing with those types of things? How established is it? And when chaos is introduced, does all hell break loose and then the biomechanics and the kinetics and the kinematics, do they all go astray? Or do we still have control of them in the variable conditions, okay? The second one being the authenticity is how is that athlete performing based on who he or she is as an individual, okay? Are we matching up aspects of the anthropometric features, the biomechanics, the neuromechanics, in some of the aspects of what makes him or her tick, okay? And then finally, the kinetics and the kinematics is have we matched those areas and aspects up of the kinetic and kinematic structure to match the sport demands. So when that athlete is performing, even if it is solidified in that pattern that we're seeing being reproduced when they have to perform in sport is solidified, it might not have the best, most optimum utilization of the kinetic and kinematic structure. So we have to look to optimize each one of these areas if we ever fully expect that biodynamic structure to evolve. Okay? So essentially what we're referring to here when we talk about biodynamic structure evolution is we're talking about the optimization that an individual athlete's kinetics and kinematics will occur and be used in an unconscious, involuntary, solidified way. Okay, so this is competent, it's involuntary, and it's unconscious. It can just happen in the ever-changing environment of sport, depending on that athlete's level of qualification and then their mastery. Okay? So that's just one area, though. You can see that that only bites off about a third of what it is that we need to talk about yet when we're referring to the specialization and optimization of that kinesiological pattern and what's going to happen as we improve or increase the movement mastery level. The second area that we're going to look at and investigate and talk about here today is the senses. This is an under-investigated aspect, in my opinion, of sport movement mastery increase, but we should know that this is vital. Because if we're talking about the increase or improvement of skill acquisition or the improvement of expertise in any realm, the sensory system, in the way that the senses get honed and fine-tuned to the challenges in the task, are going to be very, very vital and important. If movement mastery level is to ever increase, the senses must become very in tuned with how the body must be adjusted, or how the athlete himself has to be adjusted to overcome all challenges in the environment and do the right things. Okay? We know that the expert, if we look at a beginner versus an expert, a beginner may not have full competency or even the conscious wherewithal to know and understand what he or she is feeling or doing wrong. Versus the expert, as they move up in levels of expertise and mastery, they start to know and feel because they know where their body is in space based on their vision or their hearing or their touch. Okay? So this is something that is important, but again, under-investigated and prioritized, in my opinion, in most sport drills. If we look at experts in sport, we might find that the most expertise-driven individual, such as if we were to blindfold an athlete or something of that nature, or take away his hearing, they might still have the same level or close to a same level of display as well as outcome of that movement. Okay? It might not be identical, but it's going to get close because they have fine-tuned the feeling of so many of the other aspects of their senses. And this is when we know that an athlete will start to get more optimized in regards to how they feel, see, and hear in the sporting environment. Moving on even further, we go down to the problem-solving aspects of sport movement. Again, this opens up a whole other can of worms as it starts to bridge the physiology with the psychology, as well as many aspects and factors of the motor potential, the specific motor potential, along with the technical mastery and the technical execution of the sport movement strategies. Okay? We know that the most masterful of movers are able to then consistently perform with the highest levels of comfort within the sport. Okay? If we start to look at the things that contribute to this problem solving, we see three main ideas. This particular psychological factors, the level or degree of ownership that that athlete portrays, and then the use of strategies in order to overcome the challenges within the environment. If we start at the psychological factors, we're talking about issues of cognition and perception. Okay? So perception, motivation to overcome a particular task or to complete a particular task. And then ideas of anticipation. So we know that the most masterful movers can anticipate how the environment is going to change, maybe what their opponents are going to do or what they need to do respective of the stimuli changes. So these types of things are huge. Again, under-addressed and under-investigated in many aspects of sport, But we know that if we look at like reactive agility type situations and circumstances, agility and change of direction. So agility in sport and change of direction, and say a pro agility or a shuffle drill or something of that nature, are going to be very, very different in many cases. And usually it comes down to ideas of the psychological factors: perception, motivation, and anticipation to overcome challenges within the environment to be able to have the most optimum kinesiological pattern of sport. And we know that that individual will have a higher level of movement mastery. Going on to the ownership side, we see the two C's of ownership, okay? Control and comfort. So how much control does that athlete have when chaos starts to be placed and elicits different responses, as well as how much comfort do they have when it occurs? Some athletes panic and they can't do the right things at the right times in order to lay down the best kinesiological pattern of that sport movement display that we're expecting or anticipating. And this ownership sometimes goes hand in hand with the strategies that that athlete will use in order to overcome those challenges. Okay? And really that's what the kinesiological pattern of sport movement is. If we really go back to it, it's just the problem-solving activity. Movement just allows us to be that problem-solving activity of sport. Okay? And so the strategies then involve two D's: the diversity and the decision making. Okay, so the decision making to lay down the right strategy to utilize the right movement in order to overcome the challenge in the environment most optimally, as well as in the diversity of movement skills to be able to do so. Okay, I talk to my NFL players all the time in regards to having diverse or robust abilities and movement skills. So that means that you're not locked into a particular way or method of execution that might not work among all problems. So when you're stressed and placed under the environmental changes of the diversity of problems that can occur, we have a diversity of solutions in order to overcome that. So you can see as we kind of open up Pandora's box here on the kinesiological pattern of sport movement, that in order to increase or improve movement mastery and optimization of the athlete's kinesiological pattern, we must adequately address each one of these contributing factors in our training and our drill design, okay? Because we have to look to increase all of these contributing factors if that's ever to be optimized, okay? So we're looking to fully allow that athlete then the ability to manage and direct his or her movement in order to overcome the challenges and the problems of the sport environment. So again, I know this is a huge topic and one that's sometimes difficult to grasp your mind around when we're talking about all these contributing factors, because there's a lot involved here. But as we know, sport movement itself is vitally complex, and we have to be able to address our needs in the same fashion as a movement specialist if we're ever going to expect to raise the level of movement mastery and give that athlete the ability to have ownership and to be the most virtuous of mover. Okay? So for Sean Mishka, Movement Mastery and OptimizeMovement.com, this has been another movement lesson. Till next time, Movement Masters, let's go out and get it, and let's all continue to master the art of optimizing movement.